Hello, so today we're going to be going over positioning in set 15. I'm going to try and break down as many different types of positioning and ways to position around different units in the set in order to get the most out of your TFT experience. If you like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe because I do daily TFT guides, and if they help you out, it does help me out as a smaller TFT content creator. We're also working on our 10,000 sub goal, so if we can hit that relatively early, that would be really nice. I'll do an RP giveaway when we hit 10,000 subs. Additionally, if you want first-hand looks at some of the concepts I'm going to show you in this video, you can also check out my Fenrir But Gaming VODs channel. So this is a new channel that I'm going to link in the first comments, that I'm posting daily VODs of gameplay, and so I do like my rank up in set 15. Specifically, the video that is this one, the Star Guardian one, where I played Crystal Gambit into Star Guardian. A lot of the stuff that I talk about here, like avoiding stuns and playing around them, is something that I do firsthand in this video because I get aim for the top, so I can actually position because I know exactly who I'm fighting every single round. But anyways, let's get started with it. So some of the early stuff here that I talk about is going to be a little bit basic, but just as a little bit of like, you know, of a scheduling for the video, we're going to talk about like units like Jarvan and Akali, don't worry, but first we're just going to start about base. We're going to talk about some basic positioning tips just to get everybody on the same page. So basically, when you think about positioning, first thing you should always think about is frontline and backline. So one example of this is just having a really reliable frontline and then a really strong backline. This is the crux of how a lot of TFT comps are kind of constructed and played around. Here, for example, I'm just putting some synergies, not necessarily making a meta board, but just saying 4 Bastion, 4 Sniper, and I just want to like point out some of the stuff. I should probably pick a higher cost Sniper just to make it a little bit easier to see. But anyways, let's say you're playing around this board and you have your main tank being this Leona and your main damage dealer being the Jinx. Typically, you're going to have one main tank and one main damage dealer. When you think about positioning, there are a couple different things that come into play. Typically, you're just going to try and arrange frontline units or units that have, you know, low range tanks in the front line, your backline units being in the backline. The safest place typically is going to be your main tank being somewhere close to the middle, just because it kind of helps that when other people are trying to do damage to your board. Let's just take some Nikos as examples here. Right? Like when your opponent has other frontline units, eventually, like, you know, the units that get targeted first are the ones on the outside. So, you know, they'll slowly die off, and then your main tank will kind of be in the center. So it's a relatively simple way of just making sure that your frontline doesn't collapse and they don't have like awkward units on fringes making it around by killing a lot of the middle units, so to speak. So this is usually the typical safe way. You just put your front line somewhere towards the middle. We'll talk about other variations. And then typically what you're going to do is you're going to put your main carry somewhere in a corner, either on the left side or the right side, tucked away. Whether left side or right side is going to come down to different matchups, which we're going to talk about during this video, but typically the corner is the safest place. Why is that? Because you can imagine once your front line is completely dead, the enemy breaks through and starts running in. They're going to start running in and they're likely going to target towards the center first. A lot of times the corner is the safest spot because it's going to be harder for them to get to there, right? You just want them to be nice and tucked away, have other units that can kind of be more like bait towards the center, and then eventually take out this unit. Like I said, there's going to be different variations that apply in different circumstances, and we're going to go through this. But in the most basic way of TFT, main carry in the corner, tank kind of in the center, and a bunch of your other units all towards the front. But anyways, if we're talking about like center tank, so now we can go in a little bit more depth. Sometimes there's center tank, and this can also be considered like maybe if you're solo frontlining a tank. We already talked about it a little bit. The main reason that a lot of people just put your tank kind of towards the center, a lot of your weaker tank units or secondary tanks will die off. And because your tank is in the center, it's hardest to wrap. Because a lot of times, like if you have units like on fringes, for example, and this unit dies, then it's going to go to this unit, then this unit dies, then it's going to go to this unit, and as you can see, it's difficult for them to wrap. If you arrange your unit something like, you know, tank all the way on one side, then what can happen is, you know, these units can die, and then all of a sudden there's some way into your backline because your main tank isn't the one that's getting aggroed. That's why a lot of times people just prefer to put it towards the center. It's just the safe way. It avoids like some awkward situations. There's also situations where you might want to have a solo frontline unit. This typically occurs when you are playing a reroll style comp. So here I'm just showing as an example reroll with Janna, Rakan, Protectors. In these type of cases, usually it's like a gargoyle. The reason that you put your unit like full in the center and you solo frontline the unit, so let's say we have other Protectors, you know, sometimes you might put them a little bit further away. like I said, this is like very situational, but solo frontline units is mostly because they can get a lot of value of just absorbing all of the damage pretty easily. So sometimes they can be like a really good drain tank, or if you have stuff like, you know, multiple gargoyles that they have really good survivability. Excuse me, let me take another gargoyle. You get a lot of value off of it, right? Gargoyle, for every unit that's targeting the holder, they'll gain 10 armor and 10 magic resist. So if you have an opponent who has a bunch of Nikos again, and they have the units all in their front line, what will happen is they'll all kind of wrap around this one unit. That one unit can kind of become the giga tank that will then take all of the aggro and can like stack up something like Gargoyle if you have that synergy. I can also work with other units if they have like certain like drain tank properties. Like for example, you might see this with like an innervating locket setup. Looking for innervating locket, right, where like getting hit makes you generate mana, then you get your cast off, so then it just becomes like impossible to kill because you're constantly healing and then doing great things, right? This is like an idea, but like I said, this is more of like a situational thing, not something that's necessarily going to always occur. Now, we were talking about tank in the center. There's also the concept of playing around outer tanks, so putting your tanks on the outside instead. Tanks on the outside could be really substantial in certain matchups. So for example, let's say you have a lot of frontline units. Let's say you have like 2 tanks, right? A lot of times you might position your tanks in a way like this. And the reason is that it makes things a little bit safer for you getting wrapped, right? Like I said before, sometimes it's hard to get wrapped if you have like your main tank in the center, but sometimes if some of your weaker units die and there's like an overflow of frontline units on the enemy side, sometimes they can still find a way just from lack of space to target, right? As you can see, like at one point they lack space to target, and then sometimes they can get into these awkward situations where they're like equidistant apart from multiple units, and then they can like wrap a backline. So sometimes if you want to make it like really safe against getting wrapped, so when I say wrapped, I mean like a unit finding their way awkwardly into the backline. More particular with melee carries, these Nikos aren't going to be the big threat. It's usually if somebody has like, you know, a Yone or a Katarina or something like that. Sometimes what you'll do is you'll place your tanks kind of like with like 2 strong tanks on the edges. And what this does is just makes it so that your unit is like giga safe here. So let's say like my Jinx is my main carry. By putting the tank on this side, it's going to be really hard for these units to get to the Jinx, right? Because like even if these units die, these are the weaker tanks, so they'll probably die first. These Nikos go here, these Nikos go here. It becomes really hard to like get these units to the Jinx unless your main tank dies. Additionally, as you can see, because you're like separating 2 strong tanks on either side, you're not making enough of a gap in order for these units to overflow and kind of make it to your backline. Because what's going to happen is your weaker tanks are going to die towards the center. Additionally, this type of positioning matters a lot if you're playing around melee style carries that maybe you want to keep a little bit safe. So for example, let's say we have like, I don't know, Katarina and Yone, for example. If you want to put them in the front line, it can help to put them more towards the middle and put the main tanks on the outside. Now, why is that? Because when there's an enemy unit, let's pick an enemy carry, let's say Ashe, right? This person's playing Neeko and Ashe. As you can see, the Ashe, I'm going to put her in 3rd row just so it's easier to see. The Ashe, if she's in the corner, is going to be targeting the edges first. The Ashe targeting your main tank is a good thing, because you want your main tank to be like glue to the enemy carry. You want the enemy carry to be stuck on your enemy tank. By putting your units not towards the center, as you can see here, if you put your Katarina on the edge, there's a good chance that boom, your Katarina just dies instantly. That's damage that you can no longer do, that's ults that you can no longer cast. Same with something like a Rel, right? Rel, she does something, right? Even if she's not your main tank, she's gonna do something if she gets an ult off. So having her on the edge in some of these cases, she's gonna die really fast. So if you want to keep some of your units safe and get off some meaningful ults, this can matter a lot, especially if you have stun units. For example, let's throw in like a Kabuko that has a stun. It can help to put them safe between 2 of the stronger tanks, just because this Ashe now won't be targeting this Kabuko. Kabuko can ult, this can sway the fight, and then you'll kind of have like a more easy time clutching up later. It can also keep some of the enemy some of your carries a little bit more healthy, just because, like, you know, if you put them right here, it's getting targeted first, it's going to die instantly. If you put like a shitty tank here and then you try and target, it's going to die second, because this guy's going to die, then it's going to target this unit. So if you put your main tank and you keep them safe between stronger tanks, it's going to be hard unless they specifically position in such a way to directly target your carry or your melee unit or your tank or whatever. They're a little bit safer inside like that little like huggies of stronger tanks, if that makes sense. So that's where outer tank can come into play. Usually, I would say you usually default to having a center tank. If you have like, you know, one main tank and the rest of them aren't super relevant or important, just because it's just like the standard default is really hard to like go wrong there. These more experimental stuff where you put the tanks a little bit more on the outside, I would say is more so if you have specific units that you want to get ults off and you want to keep them safe. So something like, you know, stuns, you can think of it that way and keep your stuns a little bit safer in the middle, just because sometimes things like these can go wrong. And having your tank targeted first, if your tank isn't really tanky or super tanky, the worst thing that can happen is this main tank dies and then your whole front line collapse really easily. So it really depends on how you're playing around the matchup. Next, let's talk about Assassin and Tank. So this is one that's new for the set, which I wanted to talk about a little bit today. So let's take an enemy carry. Let's go back to the Ashe because that's our little example here. So here I have a Katarina. So if you don't know, it doesn't say, you see right at the top, Katarina, it says her name, and then on the right side, it says Magic Assassin. I'll scroll down a bit just to make sure that it shows up here. So this is something that's new for this set. So it might be a little bit awkward if you don't notice it right away, but Katarina is a Magic Assassin. And then there's units like this, Leona, that is a magic tank. Something that is part of the assassin trait is that they have a decreased priority in getting targeted. Additionally, a magic tank has an increased priority in getting targeted. So the word tank usually means an enemy carry, if given like a 50-50, will target your tank first and will not target the assassin. So what can end up happening in some cases, like for example, if you have an assassin next to a tank, the backline unit of the enemy won't target the Katarina if there's like a 50-50 or if there's like an inclination of like which one to target. The decision making will always be tie broken by the fact that this is a tank. In certain matchups, this can matter a lot because remember what we were talking about before, where it's like if you want your unit to walk up, if you want your unit to have like a free wrap, right? If I want to get this Katarina on an express route to the back line, this can work out really well. Positioning her next to a tank, this Ashe should target the Leona, and then the Katarina can walk up, especially if there's not like a good tank or enemy carry here. All of a sudden we get into striking range where maybe Katarina casts her ult and blinks towards the back line. It can be really substantial. Actually, at a game today where I had, I'll show you the situation that I ran into with this. I had a Seraphine, a Yasuo. Actually, I can probably just show you guys straight up. Let me just get the VOD actually. I think that would be a little bit more beneficial. Okay, let me drum up this VOD. This is a really good example for this, so I'm just gonna show you, just in case it's not super clear what's going on. I think I gotta do this. There we go. So check out this fight. So this is from today. I think there's my dog's covering the video. But check out this fight, right? So we can actually watch the Seraphine specifically in this video. So this is for a what I was just talking about, an assassin next to a tank. So Yasuo is an assassin here. So as you can see, watch my Seraphine. So my Seraphine, there's a Yasuo and there's an Aatrox there. Who do you think my Seraphine's going to target? Well, my Seraphine's going to target the Aatrox because Aatrox is a tank. So watch what happens in this fight. So I'm positioning a little bit awkward. We're going to talk about this later. This is positioned for Jarvan specifically. But if you watch my Seraphine, if you watch the bullet, it hit the Aatrox first. So she's targeting the Aatrox. The Yasuo doesn't get targeted because both units are targeting towards the tanks here. And as you can see, the Yasuo walks up. My Seraphine actually wastes time by walking up to chase this Aatrox that she's stuck on, that she's trying to attack. So now I've just completely griefed my positioning. Nothing's working out. Yasuo's on my backline, and I basically walked up to hit that unit. It's something just important to note. Sometimes the assassin and tank synergies can end up into situations like this. Now, if you're trying to position against it, you know, it could be a little bit awkward, but just keep that in mind, that you'll have a priority of hitting towards tank, which is something that's new in this set, like I said. But I just wanted to show you that example because I think it helps illustrate that point with a clear cut, like, hey, this is what happened to me today type of beat. So just keep that in mind. Next we have, where is it? Next we have specific targeting. So this is one that I just want to talk about. Like obviously we talked about like if they have to target between an assassin and a tank, the unit will always target towards the tank. But if you're targeting towards two different tanks, so tank A, tank B, a lot of times this is a 50-50 of who you're going to target. If you have room and your unit has space to walk up, what you could do is position 2 hexes away. Now, for example, here the Yone will target specifically these units. This matters a lot if you're playing towards like edgelords or units that reset on kills. A lot of times this can matter with somebody like what's it called, like a Darius, for example, if you're trying to like specifically target one particular tank to get like the whole chain effects going. But either way, if you're trying to specifically try and kill one unit before another unit, you can position 1 row back, and then in this case you'll always target this, assuming there's space, right? Obviously if you have like 2 tanks or you have 2 units in front, then the Yone is going to walk around and end up targeting something else. But just to let you know, that's something that can come into play. Next we have the trait Protector. So Protector has a little bit of a synergy that I should talk about a little bit here. If we read a Protector trait, basically units gain durability while shielded. Once per combat at 50% health, Protectors shield themselves and their closest ally for a percent of their maximum health. So what does that mean? Let's say we're going back to the example where Rakan 3-star is our main carry. If the Protectors are applying a shield to themselves and their closest ally, what can help out is positioning your units kind of in like a cascading order where the weakest units are on the outside and the strongest units on the inside. It can be really apparent in a setup like this if you make like a little clump or maybe have 3 units, for example. What happens here is, right, Kennen, not very strong as a Protector, right? He's a 1 cost. If he's not 3-star or itemized, he's not going to do too much, right, compared to like our 3-star unit. Same with Malphite, not going to be the greatest unit on our board. These units are probably going to die first, and they're probably going to lose their HP first. So if we want to give a good health shield to the Rakan, or we want to give the health shield like relatively early, then putting the weaker Protectors next to him, when these people drop to 50% health, now Rakan will get the health shield. It can matter quite a bit. It's not super relevant because obviously the weaker units are going to have less HP. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to put like your secondary tanks, like ones that have like a good chunk of HP, next to your main Protector, because that way, if let's say our Neeko is our secondary tank, then the Rakan, you know, ideally shields the Neeko, and the Neeko ideally shields with the Rakan. But that's why I say like it can help. You don't want to put your Rakan on the outside because the Rakan is the main tank, so you want him to be getting the most shielding. So obviously you would want to put at least one other unit on the opposite side to try and help transfer those shields onto the closest ally, which would be the Rakan in this case. This is something that can matter with Protectors. It could also matter based on if you're playing like less Protectors, for example, because they don't shield the lowest Protector, they shield their closest ally. So it's something that could, like, you know, if you're playing a mixed board that is not fully Protector, then you would want to position your Protector in a way that it is towards either your main tank or towards like a melee carry, somebody that you want to quote unquote protect, which should be, you know, pretty self-explanatory. Next, we have our trait Sorcerers. So Sorcerer is a little bit interesting, and I'm not sure exactly how relevant some of this is, but I'll try my best to explain it the way that I see it kind of in my games, or what I try to do. So let's say, let's take, let me think here. I want to take heavyweight, and then I need another heavyweight. Heavyweight, sure. And then just to further illustrate, I'll put some Warmogs on here. So when you're playing around Sorcerers, so here I'm gonna put just to further illustrate it, we're just trying to like show cascading HP. A lot of times a front line is going to be composed of like the strong tanks that are going to be like your main tank on a board, and it's going to be composed of like weaker tanks. If you read the Sorcerer trait, Sorcerers gain ability power, and then when an enemy dies after being damaged by a Sorcerer, they heal a percentage of that. They deal a percentage of that enemy's maximum HP to another enemy. So specifically, like especially if you're playing around 6 Sorcs, for example, you would deal damage to 2 extra enemies. Now, there's 2 ways that you can think about playing Sorcs. One way is that you kind of like, but one way is that you aim for like the biggest tank. So in this case, the Poppy has the most HP, so you try and kill the Poppy to proc the Sorc bonus effect to do a bunch of damage to 2 extra enemies. If you're playing vertical Sorc, or if you're playing less Sorc, it's going to be less maximum HP, whatever. The other way that you can play Sorc is that you can go for like a cascading buildup of damage by just targeting the weaker units first. I think that's the one that I see the most success with. Now, of course, this is still experimental because Sorcs is something that's wasn't super relevant so far, and this is a guide that's a little bit earlier in the patch. But what I would suggest doing with Sorcs, or what I find to be more successful, is aiming towards the weaker tanks. Now, why is that? You basically like to start an engine going, especially if you're playing vertical Sorc, because you want to try and get the damage bonus procs from the Sorc units to kind of help explode all of the board very easily. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we hit Kabuko. Kabuko dies. Now he does damage to another unit. Now Jace all of a sudden becomes easier to kill because he just took some damage from the Kabuko just off rip. Now the Jace takes damage. That now does damage to the Poppy. It makes the Poppy easier to kill, which then kills the unit. Additionally, we're eliminating units that have effects. They can have stuns. They can have other bonus effects that help their board. They soak up damage. They do damage. So removing more and more units from the board, it makes it so that the Sorc effect becomes more and more meaningful, because now if you're hitting 2 enemies and you eliminated 2 enemies, there's a greater chance that's going to hit a more meaningful unit, maybe even a backline unit. Who knows? Combine that with other AoE effects like Gwen or Ahri or Lux or Karma. All of a sudden, you could just explode the board very easily. However, if you target the main tank, let's say like in this case we're targeting the main tank first, then you might spend too much time trying to kill the main tank that you never actually start your cascading damage of just doing the Sorc proc to multiple enemies. By the time this main tank dies, then it just becomes like, the fight might be too late, and it's hard to kind of like get, you get the extra Sorc procs later, but you really need them to help you take down the main tank in the first place. So when you're positioning for this, what I would say is I would position my units in such a way to target the weaker side or the weaker unit. So for example, if I have Ahri and Karma as my main carries, here I'll drop some of the Sorc units to make it easier to see. If I have Ahri and Karma, or Ahri and Karma, yeah, sorry, Ahri and Karma, those are the 2 units. I'm having a brain lapse, my apologies, right? I wouldn't position them on this side, because I think I'm going to spend way too much time trying to kill this Poppy, that it's going to give them, the enemy team, too much time to destroy my front line. What I would rather do is go on this side. Kabuko has a stun. I want to kill the Kabuko, be on the same side as the Kabuko, get rid of this Kabuko, have him do damage, that then does damage to this, that then does damage to this, because then Kabuko dies, now I'm targeting the Jace, then the Jace dies, and then Poppy now, after all those HP procs that we're doing on the board, might have a little bit less HP. All of a sudden, it's easier to kill that Poppy. And then we can get the Giga Sorc proc. Now that we've decomposed or delete the front line, this massive HP is now going to go to the backline units, which can just easily wipe the board, and then we're good to go. And it takes out some of the RNG, because now we've just if we abolish all the other frontline units that are weaker, we make the front line easier to collapse. As soon as we collapse the front line, then boom, the whole board is dead. Sorc 101. That's what I think. Obviously, this might change. Maybe it is always target the heaviest hitter first, or the largest unit, but that's just like a little tip from me. Next, let's talk about snipers. So typically, we're gonna go back to like the beginning. So when I was talking about positioning, I kind of talked about putting your carry safe in the corner and then deciding on which side to put your carry. A lot of times, let's take Ashe, because Ashe was our example unit, right? A lot of times, if one person has a front line and a back line, a lot of times the typical default way to play TFT is you put your front line, you put your back line, and then you put your enemies opposite to each other. The reason is that while this front line dies, right, you want your unit to be as far away from the enemy unit as possible, because you want them to walk up and take time to hit your unit. Obviously, if you have a front line that collapses, then it's going to be really bad for you, because like your board's going to die pretty easily. Right? Like, let's say your front line is weaker and you're on the same side. Boom, these die. The Jinx doesn't have to walk that far to kill your back line. So a lot of times when you have a board, you want to try and put your units on the opposite side. Now that's going to change when we talk about snipers. Snipers, depending on which side you're playing it from, if you are the sniper player, snipers gain damage amp increase against targets that are the furthest away. So with sniper, you have more damage if you are positioned further away from the enemy. So if you are trying to position your main carry, you always want to be on opposite side of the main carry. So when you're looking and you're scouting, whatever your main carry is, whether it be Jinx or in this case Varus or maybe even Caitlyn, you want to put them on the opposite side of the enemy carry. That way you're getting maximum sniper value, right? You don't want them on the same side because that's going to be less sniper value. There's less hexes. I'm sure you can count them. You know, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, whatever count. And this is just like 1, 2, 3, whatever count, right? It's going to be shorter distance. You want them to be on the maximum distance possible. Additionally, there are units. In this case, Caitlyn is a good example because she also has the fire a bullet at the furthest enemy. So Caitlyn has that effect. Other units that have that effect is also Kalista. Kalista has the effect, hurl a spear at the furthest enemy. So if you have a unit that has furthest enemy, which in this case it works really well with Caitlyn because she also gets the damage amp, you also want to be on opposite side of the main carry. That's going to be a very strong way to deal with the enemy carry, because obviously if you snipe the carry, you win the game for free. Additionally, when we're talking about Farthest, which in this case, you know, snipers is very obvious. If you're talking about a unit like, for example, Kalista, it can also help to try and bait the front line towards the side to uncover the enemy. So for example, let's say we put the Nico on this side, we put the Jace on our side. If you read Kalista, right, she hurls a spear at the furthest enemy, but it deals damage to the first enemy hit. So if you're dealing damage to the first enemy hit, as you can see, the Nico's going to hit, it's going to hit the Nico's going to tank it, you're not going to kill the enemy carry. What can help is if you try and make space for the Kalista. So for example, if you try and put your Jace off to the side, then the Nico walks away. Well, in this case it's hard to show because like it's not to full scale, but what I'm trying to say is, like, if you put your units off to one side or even off to this side, for example, you want to try and like uncover a little bit of space in the middle so that the Kalista can get a clean shot through. That's something that happens sometimes with Farthest targeting. This was really apparent in some sets. Like I remember Lux in set 11, if you played Porcelain Lux, this was something that was really, really important. And there's lots of different positioning styles that you can do around that. For example, you can also put your carry a little bit in the middle, because that way there's always a clear line to hit the backline unit, right? Kalista, she's not scaling off distance anyways. She's throwing a spear at the furthest target. You don't have to put her here. You can put her here, because now look, there's a clean line to the enemy carry, and that is definitely the furthest unit because this Nico is definitely closer. So there's lots of like awkward positionings that you can do. Always look for an angle. Try and visualize the angle, and that can help you a lot with units that are specifically targeting furthest. Especially if it stops on, like in this case it says like it stops at the first enemy. You want to make sure that you have that clear shot to snipe. Next we have 2 Hex Range. In this case we're going to talk about Katarina, but there are some other 2 Hex Range units. When I say 2 Hex Range, I'm not talking about Gwen. Like Gwen is pretty straightforward. She just targets from 2 hexes, so you put her in the second row. As you can see, she has a 2 Hex range in her damage. What I mean is 2 Hex range effects. So for example, Katarina blink to the enemy with the lowest HP within 2 hexes. So what does that mean? Well, 1 hex would be this far, right? This is 1 hex away, and then 2 hex would be 1 more, right? So let's go full board just so I can show the example. It would be the circle encompassed by the 2 hex range like this. What does that mean a lot of the times? Well, sometimes you have to kind of visualize 2-step procedure of like getting to a backline. Katarina and 2 hex ranges could sometimes be great, sometimes be a little bit grief. But the idea is that if there's a low health enemy, whichever one is the lowest health within 2 hexes, it will then target towards that side. A lot of times it can help to put Katarina on the same side as an enemy carry, because for example, let's say this unit is the lowest HP. I'll use the Warmogs to illustrate it, just in case you tune in a little bit later. So let me put some Warmogs up here. Bang, 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 right? Let's say Katarina is targeting the lowest HP unit. Sometimes she'll blink and she'll go like this on opposite side. Now this unit is within range. So Katarina can easily get to the backline, especially if one of these backline units is within 2 hex ranges. So a lot of times it helps to put Katarina in one of these squares. Obviously, like, you know, it really depends on which unit is the lowest HP. So you really have to decide where you're focusing fire, where you focus fire. A lot of times, like if you have another carry that is doing some damage, for example, a Yuumi, it can help to target like the same unit just to make sure that the Katarina gets her effect off, and then she can maybe walk or go to a back line, especially if their front line is a little bit, you know, out of place, because then she might be able to get a wrap. Whenever you think about these type of units that are trying to kill within 2 hexes, even Gangplank, right? Gangplank doesn't teleport, so it's a little bit different, right? But even with Gangplank, a lot of times you just want to try and get them eventually within 2 hexes of a main carry, such that you can then apply their effect of 2 hex ranges. But typically 2 hexes, unless you have a unit like Katarina that's teleporting, it's going to be hard to do. Now, how do you play around this in a way that's a little bit easier? For example, let's say you're trying to position against Katarina. So I'll swap the sides here. I'll pretend that I'm the Caitlyn, and I'll put the Katarina on the opposite side. So this is defensive against Katarina. Something that's really important, you'll see me do this a lot, just make sure your units are very far away. That basically, even if the unit teleports, she won't be able to do it. Sometimes I'll use a positioning like this, where I'll leave this space open. It's a little bit risky. It really does depend on the on your enemy's board, so be careful with this. This isn't works all the time type of board, but something that can help is basically clumping your units onto an opposite side. So for example, let's put Ahri and some Caitlyn's over here. If this is my main carry, let's put her as 3-star just so it's obvious. She'll never get targeted by Katarina, because Katarina is going to target the lowest HP within 2 hexes. If she goes here, she can teleport here, she can teleport here, she can teleport here. She's in the playpen, right? There's no way she'll ever go towards this until she gets to like this spot, right? But like, that's what I mean. It's very easy to like make, not very easy, but like there's a lot of times where situationally, if you clump your units on an opposite side, you can make like a juicy trap for Katarina to just like get stuck jumping around on this side while your main carry is safe. Obviously, it's not all the time that's going to work, because, you know, eventually you have enough units that Katarina can jump. But it's just a matter of buying enough time to make sure that you do enough damage before the Katarina kind of reams through everything. It's just something to keep in mind, something that's pretty important. Next, we have 3 Hex ranges, which is the Ionic Spark Augment. So, High Voltage has a 3 Hex radius. I don't think it's super relevant to really discuss all that much, but basically 3 hexes in some cases can hit backline if you get a walk up. So for example, let's say my Nico has Spark, this Caitlyn is in the backline. It can help, like, as soon as you get to this range, this is like 3 hex range. So you're typically not going to be hitting backline very easily, but basically if you can walk up 1 step, sometimes you can get to 3 hex range. Now, this used to matter with like some units that had you know, more range, so to speak, like or like 3 hex and had like the range of like Sejuani, for example, last set, where she would hit the unit and then the 3 hex range would hit the corner. But it's just something to keep in mind. If you can get like to around this spot, you're basically hitting the entire backline. A lot of times, even here, you can end up hitting the backline based on like the position, the exact like micro positioning of the units you can sometimes hit. So usually you're aiming for like having your unit in this hex or this hex on the same side as the enemy carry. This hex or this hex, this hex or this hex. But the one that's more relevant this set is definitely going to be 4 hex range. So now we're going to talk about unit specific positioning. So this is for Akali. So Akali, if you played last set, there was a unit that was kind of similar for like Zed that targeted backline units. If you want to know, basically with Akali, she targets within 4 hexes. So farthest unmarked target within 4 hexes. 4 hex range, 1, 2, 3, 4. She hits the backline carry. So let's say you have a main carry. We'll take Ashe again because that was the example we were using before. If you have Akali, basically you always want to put Akali in either this spot or this spot, right? Either 3 from the right, or sorry, 3 from the left or 3 from the right. You don't want to put her in the center. You don't necessarily need to put her here or here. Usually this is the sweet spot if your opponent has a unit in the corner, because basically if you put her here, she'll target this corner. If you put her here, she'll target this corner. You want to get the Akali on the enemy carry as soon as possible, because she will dash to the target, then she'll mark them, and then she will mark, in terms of marking, she'll then continue to do damage to those units typically, right? Similar to how Zed was designed. So you always want to be in 4 hex range. This unit has direct backline access. Now, if you're trying to position against an Akali, a lot of times you can put bait for the Akali, and it helps to, like, you know, for example, in this case, right? The Akali will dash to this Ashe, not, well, we should use 2 different units. Let's take who's a backline duelist? Kayle. There we go. Right? Let's say Ashe is my main carry here. This way, the Akali will dash to the Kayle. Additionally, you can put your units more towards the center. In this case, when you have a unit like Akali that is dashing, it's literally going to come down to like mind games of positioning, right? They're either going to put their unit here and target towards the center, put their unit here, target towards the corner. So depending on who you're matching up against, it's going to help you to put your units in the center. Now, typically, like I said before, the corner is usually the safe spot for your units. But if you're going up against this, obviously the corner isn't safe. So you want to make sure that here, for example, the Kayle is further. So then you're going to save yourself. And then after the Kayle, assuming your Kayle can live a couple hits, the Akali is going to dash away and then you'll be safe. Now, obviously, it's hard to predict how the fight's going to go when she dashes like 100 different times. Eventually, she will make it onto your carry no matter where your carry is. But a lot of it is just making sure that you can avoid it for as long as possible to give your carry as much time to do as much damage as possible. Next, we have Jarvan. So this is the one that I think a lot of people are going to get frustrated with. Jarvan's not very clear exactly how it works, but basically, he jumps into a group of enemies, dealing magic damage to enemies within a 2 hex radius. So 2 hex radius is massive, because 2 hex radius means that he's basically going to stun most of the board. You have to be very careful around this unit, because this unit can sway a fight very instantly. If you're playing around Jarvan, basically, like, let's say the enemy has like a bunch of units. Let's just throw them all on the enemy board. Jarvan's gonna see a group, right? He's gonna, like, his AI is gonna circle up a group. He's gonna jump in and he's gonna do a giant splash damage, right? A lot of times he'll jump and you know, there'll be some array of backline units, and then you just boom, you're just stunned your backline carry, and now you just lose the game for free. That's kind of how Jarvan works. What I always recommend is positioning him on the same side as the enemy carry, just to try and get him to circle that group as his stun target. So, you know, I wouldn't position him here with expectations of stunning this back corner. Position him here. Now, he does jump in, right? So it's kind of like, you know, based on the group. So the exact positioning of him isn't super crazy or relevant, but I would position him similar to Akali, here or here. You can also position him here or here to try and make that group a little bit more apparent. Now, how do you position against Jarvan? So what I like to do a lot is I position like this, for example. Like, it's very similar to what I was talking about with Katarina, but I'll position, it's obviously risky, but if you need to, by all means, avoid the Jarvan, you basically want to make it so that there isn't a good group for him, because he will never jump this way. From my testing, even though he doesn't say the largest group, I think it still works towards like jumping towards the largest group, but he doesn't jump this way. So he's gonna jump this way. Basically, you want to make a juicy little side on the other. You want to make a juicy little group on the opposite side of your carry. So a lot of times I'll position like this. I'll have my main tank here, and then I'll have my other useless units here, or maybe even like back row them and they can walk up a little bit later. And then I'll have like the main damage that I want on this side, and then I'll put multiple units on the opposite side. That way, when Jarvan's trying to jump into a group, he's not going to jump here. He's not going to jump to stun one unit, right? Because he needs to jump to stun a group. Instead, he's going to jump this way because he's stunning the entire group. It just helps out a little bit. So just note, try and like crowd one side. One thing that I do a lot, like I'll show you with Star Guardian, you'll actually see it if you watch this video right here. Actually, I could probably show it to you right now. Let me drum this up. So in this video, I had a lot of ability to position around my opponents because I had the augment that told me who my opponents were. So I basically played against a lot of Jarvans this game. I'm sure I can find one example somewhere. I'm trying to comb the video. I think here I'm fighting a Jarvan. Okay, check this out, right? You see my positioning? So I make a nice juicy clump on one side of the board. You can see it right there. And I'm going to be fighting a Jarvan right now. So let's watch it. Let's watch this in real time. So you can see the Jarvan right in the center. And when the Jarvan jumps, he jumps to this group. You see, I made a group of all my shitter units that I don't care about. My Jinx with my 3 items and my Aura with my 3 items are totally fine. Obviously, this works really well with Star Guardian because this Frontline is really hard to kill. But as you can see, I'm fine. The Jarvan did not really impact my game. He just stunned a bunch of one-cost units. I'm not even worried about this. It's an easy win. That's a positioning diff. Right? 100% a positioning diff. If you can lose a round to a Jarvan, but if you know that you're fighting a Jarvan, and you can afford to do a positioning like this. Sometimes you can't do this, by the way, because like if they have like an assassin that can just walk up to your backline, you're really susceptible to getting like railed by certain other comps. But that's like an example of avoiding Jarvan. It's very similar to like how you would avoid Sejuani in last set. These are things that basically exist like multiple times. If you want to watch this full video, I recommend it as well. It's on my VOD channel. So just like and subscribe to the VOD channel, and there will be lots of stuff like this. I even explain it in the video. And there's lots of other positioning tricks that go out throughout the video as well. So you can check it out if you so choose. Now let's... So that was Jarvan. I think the next one is going to be about single unit stuns. Yes, single range stuns. So whenever you're thinking about a stun, obviously, you know, if you have a stun that has access to a backline, you obviously want to hit the backline, right? That's a given. You know, like let's say like, you know, your opponent's a Jinx, you want to hit the Jinx, you want to stun the Jinx. What's the next best thing to stun though? A lot of times it's actually the tank. When you have a single stun unit, it's not useful to stun some random shitter, right? Like let's say they're playing Star Guardian, because we just saw Star Guardian. If I have Braum, who has like one of the best stuns in the game, or I have Kabuko, who basically like does a stun to one single unit, like, you know, there's lots of units that have like interruptions and small stuns. I don't want to stun this unit. Who the fuck cares if I stun this Rel, right? What helps is stunning the Poppy, because Poppy has an ult, right? Her ult is going to shield, her ult is going to heal, her ult's going to do damage. That's the main tank. If you can interrupt the main tank, they can just die instantly. So a lot of times when you're positioning to stun a unit, try and position your stuns to hit their main tank to disrupt them as much as possible if you don't have a ranged stun. This is really, really important when people have like 3-star units, right? A lot of times, like, you know, if you're playing like a Rakan 3, for example, Rakan 3, he might be going infinite. He's healing constantly, right? His ult heals, he deals damage, he heals more, he heals more, he heals more. He's just unkillable, right? Well, if you put a bunch of stuns in front of him, he no longer can heal. Now, your damage dealer is doing damage. Braum just circles him. He's throwing him around. Look, Braum's here. Woo, right? This guy's here stunning him. This guy just chain CC'd and he dies instantly. Instead of the tank just living forever, you focus fire your stuns on the main tank. They will eventually collapse because they're unable to do the thing that helps them to heal. They can't cast their ult. They can't get the healing. They can't do effects. And that allows you to focus fire with your units and basically kill them off. So always make sure that when you have units that can stun, always try and position them in front of a unit that matters. Another example is, for example, a Katarina. If you target the Katarina with the Braum, obviously it's hard because she's an assassin, so there's like priority targeting and whatnot. But if you can target this Katarina, she doesn't heal anymore. She doesn't Omnivamp, she doesn't do damage. If there's melee carries and you can get a stun off on them, that instantly just wins you the fight a lot of the time. So always keep that in mind, right? Even like a Yone, right? If I grab this Yone, GG, the game's over. So always keep that in mind. Next, we have group of enemies abilities. So this is similar to Jarvan, but there's also units like Seraphine, for example. Whenever you're looking for a group of enemies, always trying to position the like we talked about Jarvan already, so this is going to be a little bit of a rehash. But if there's groups of enemies, always trying to position yourself to hit the group that is more meaningful. So if somebody isn't directly positioning such that they're like forcing your hand in which units you can basically target, right? If there's like an option, like, I don't know, let's say like, I'm going to make it very obvious here, which isn't always the case. Let's get rid of you and let's put Syndra, right? So for example, let's say here, right? There's two groups of enemies. It's very obvious, right? There's the Jinx, which is like the stronger unit, and then there's the Syndra, which is the weaker unit. If I have to choose who to position for the group of enemies, I want to position on this side. Sorry, that was wrong. I want to position on this side, right? I want to jump and stun this group of enemies. Same thing with like a Seraphine. So a lot of times it helps to put the unit on the same side as the main group. Now a lot of times like I don't have space to do that with Seraphine, so a lot of times I'll just put her in the middle because she has 5 hex range. So 5 hex range is going to be able to hit both sides of the board pretty effectively. But either way, if you're hitting a group of enemies, it always helps to be on the same side as the group that you're targeting, just to make sure that that's the one that you get priority over in terms of your targeting. Next, we have X nearest enemies. So this one's very similar to group of enemies, but there are lots of effects in the game that hit multiple enemies, and you have to pay attention to these. These are very important. So for example, Janna grants a shield to lowest health allies, blah blah blah, and then butterflies between 2 closest enemies. Additionally, Kennen stuns 2 nearest enemies. Ahri hits 2 closest enemies, right? There's other units like Yuumi and Ashe that also hit 2 random enemies within a certain hex range. You can consider that similar to the grouping thing. But similar to like this imagery or this positioning that I'm showing you, you always want to put these type of units, if you can, on the same side as the enemy carries. Now, why is that? Let's say this is the main carry. Which side do I want to put my Ahri on? This side or this side? Obviously this side. Why is that? Because when this Ahri targets this Neeko, for example, let's say this Neeko dies, right? Now look at the board. What are the 2 closest enemies to the Neeko that I'm targeting? If I kill this Neeko, I'm doing damage to the main carry, right? Because these are, even if I position them like this, right? You want to be on the same side because the 2 closest could end up being a backline unit that you care about. So you want to make sure that while you're targeting your units, you're trying to hit the backline carry as much as possible, because this is not biased towards anything. It's just the closest enemies. So if it's X closest enemies, you want to make sure that you're on the same side such that at one point you're targeting their carry first, because as soon as they lose their damage, the round is over. That's how you win a round. That's how you can scam a round instantly. So if you can kill their enemy carry before you kill all the other units on the board, that's going to give you an advantage in the fight. So always consider that either with stuns or with any unit that says nearest enemies, if you can afford to do so, right? Something I should note here is going to be really important. I might make a separate timestamp if I do timestamps for this video, for this part in particular. Something that's always important is, you know, understanding when you can position on same side versus opposite side. When you have 2 boards, let's just take 2 boards that are very obvious to see which one's stronger, which one's weaker, right? If you have 2 boards that are relatively equal in power level, a lot of times, like the default positioning, like I said before, is enemy carries in the corner, and a lot of times you go opposite to the enemy carry just to give you as much time as possible to kill your units. However, let's say you have a really strong front line compared to your opponent. Here, I know my front line will always survive. Then I really want to be on same side as the enemy carry, because I know that their front line is going to die first, meaning that I'm going to be able to target the back line sooner. That's going to be really, really important, because then I can just win the fight. Instead of me targeting some bullshit unit, I target the main carry and I win the fight, because my front line is more sustainable than theirs. However, if the roles are reversed, obviously you don't want to do that. You don't want to be on the same side as the enemy carry. So if you have a reliable front, if you don't have as much of a reliable front line, you want to be on this side, because who knows? What if, like, you know, you have a shitter unit here, this unit lives, they walk up, they're over here targeting this shit for some reason, and then all of a sudden you scam the round because you kill their enemy carry first. Sometimes that can happen. Now, obviously, in the example I'm showing you, it's not very clear cut, but it can matter a lot if people have like particularly like strong front lines, right? Like, let's say they're playing reroll and they have like a 6 heavyweight front line, right? Obviously, this front line is going to be better than yours. So if they have like a 6 heavyweight and some backline unit that does damage, I don't know, let's take an Ashe for example. This is a board where, you know that your front line is going to be stable because you invested a lot in your front line. So in that case, you want to make sure that your carry has the greatest chance of like hitting the enemy carry first to end the fight as soon as possible, because like you might not have the damage in order to keep up. Meanwhile, if you're playing a board that doesn't have a lot of front line, these are things that might sway you one way or another. So no matter what, like always what precedence everything, like even though there's these minor positioning things I'm talking about, like with Janna and these other units and blah blah blah, a lot of the times just look at your front line. If your front line looks like it's gonna collapse sooner than theirs, keep your carry safe. Carry safety is #1 priority. You don't want to put them in these random ass hexes all over the place because, ooh, like Fenrir said this was a cool idea, so I want to try. It's like, no, make sure that your carry doesn't die, right? Your carry has to be the last unit to die every single time in every single fight, and that's gonna mean that you had a good positioning. If your carry's dying anytime sooner, that's a problem. Next, targeting through enemies. So this one's pretty relevant. I think it's mostly with, I put Callista here. I think I made a mistake though. I want to put Sivir. Yes. Sivir is the main one that does that, right? She launches a blade that goes through the current target, then it hits that enemy, and then it comes back. So she has like a Beyblade that goes forward and then comes back. Kayle, when she gets upgraded, she shoots waves that go through the enemy as well, which can be really powerful. And then there's also units like Senna, which straight up just shoot a line that crosses the board that goes through the main carry. So we're going to talk about all these units because some of them are a little bit separate. So I'm going to give you different example cases for all of them. Sivir is somebody who's like, there's cases with Sivir where you really want to have her hit multiple targets. When you're doing like a crew reroll, for example, this can be the difference between winning a fight and losing a fight. A lot of times with Sivir, you don't want to put her in a spot where she's only hitting one unit at a time. Let's get some Nikos, the good old tried and true, right? You don't want to position something like this, because Sivir, if you draw a line with this Sivir right now, Sivir is going to hit a unit and she's going to shoot through the unit. She's going to shoot through this Nico, right? This is where her damage is going to be. As you can see, she's only hitting the Nico. She's only hitting one unit. That's not good, because we're losing a lot of damage. It's just bad. We're losing a lot of potential damage opportunities to be able to hit that unit, or to hit another unit, so to speak, because her ability goes through the target, meaning that she will hit multiple units if you shoot through the target. So here, I'm not optimizing my positioning, or not optimizing my board. Something that can help, a lot of times people solo frontline Malphite, but even here, depending on the angle, it can be hard to hit certain units. A lot of times what you want to do, there's basically like two ways you can do this, right? One way is you can position Sivir here, because Sivir is going to target this Nico. As you can see, if she shoots through the Nico, she's shooting forward in a straight line. As you can see, it will go and hit multiple units. This was a positioning that was really apparent with Ahri in set 11? Arcana Ahri. Or Arcana Ahri, however you want to pronounce it. I think it's Arcana. High Arcana. High Arcana. It's High Arcana, I think. Whatever. I forget which one it is. But whatever that trait was. Oh, actually, I think it is Arcana. It's High Arcana, right? Arcane is just the name of the show. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting distracted because it's getting late for me. But anyways. A positioning that they used to do was something like this, which is the same position I say against Jarvan, and then the Ahri in that set would be positioned here. You can do very similar with the Sivir, because basically what's going to happen is the Sivir will always target through two units, and she just shoots the Beyblade, it goes there, and then it returns. Very similar to the Ahri in the other set. Basically what you're doing is you're making all of your frontline units on one side, and then you're forcing that however they position their frontline units to kind of wrap and surround this side, right? Even if there's a unit over here, they're likely going to wrap and go here, and then you can basically shoot multiple units and do a lot of extra bonus damage. What I suggest though, because of crew, you usually want to solo frontline the Malphite anyways, I usually position something like this. It usually causes the unit to go this way, and then I usually position Sivir here, because Ziggs I like to keep safe, because eventually Ziggs is going to be your main carry, so a lot of times you end up with a board that looks like this. And then I position my Sivir this way in order to strike through two of the units, because one unit walks up and then it does damage. If you want to see this in action, I think I also have another VOD here. I can actually just like, I can actually use this as a little example. I think I literally demonstrate this in this video if you want to see it, because this was a game where I just high rolled a Malphite 3 with Build-A-Bud. And during these rounds, I think I illustrate it right after I lose a round. Check out this. So look, I put my Sivir, like I was saying. Watch this fight. See? So I put my Sivir here. I put my Sivir not in the corner hex. I put her one hex over to the side. And watch. I think I'm going to zoom in because I was talking to my chat when I was playing this game. Yeah. So watch the Sivir now. The Sivir's targeting the Aatrox. She's going to shoot through the Aatrox. And she also does some damage to Swain. Now, obviously, a big chunk of that damage is the Malphite hitting, but that's the point. You want the Beyblade to hit through the unit to do more damage. Now, obviously, there's ways you can optimize it. Like I said, the better version of this would be to, put your units kind of like this. Like, this is how the old way of playing it was, and then you position Sivir closer to the middle to guarantee that hit. But like I said, even something like this, as long as you're making sure that your angles are good, that you're hitting multiple units, you're in a good spot, you want to get that value off of the Sivir. Another unit that could matter, now that's obviously with Crew and Sivir. If you're talking about Kayle, Kayle could matter in some cases, because Kayle shoots the waves that go through the targets as well. I wouldn't suggest putting Kayle in the middle, by the way. I don't think this is like, this is something you maybe could do, but I don't think it's worthwhile. I think it's just too risky, because Sivir usually isn't that important if she dies, because Ziggs is your main carry. But something like this is a little bit awkward for somebody like Kayle in the middle to shoot the waves, because she's usually just melts through everybody anyways. But what could help is a lot of times positioning the Kayle on the same side as the enemy carry, because if you position Kayle this way, and she's shooting a tank here, she can sometimes snipe and do some chip damage to some of the backline units, right? So like something like this can help. because she's not shooting just like one unit like forward. She can shoot and snipe the back line. So a lot of times it helps to like position if they have units on the direct corners. You can like aim for this unit on the corner, and then by shooting through the target with the wave, all of a sudden you can do some chip damage, some backline units sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. If you're positioning against a Kayle, by the way, you don't want to put your units directly like here on these hexes. You want to clump them a little bit more to the middle, because that way when Kayle is shooting their extra wave, as you can see, the wave's hitting nothing, right? There's nothing here, right? Who cares that the wave is going through this unit? It's hitting nothing, right? There's nothing here usually, because your front line is like this. So that's just something to keep in mind against Kayle. Finally, we have Senna. Senna shoots through the target. A lot of times you position on opposite sides of the carry, just because let's say this is the carry and your opposite side. She's going to shoot a laser beam. It's going to hit this unit, and then it's going to continue through the unit, which will often hit the other corner back line. Just something to keep in mind. And then I think we're almost done. We have 2 more to go through. Now we have keepers. So if you don't know, there's a keepers augment. Keepers, you grant shield to adjacent allies and the shield stacks. If you're going for maximum keeper values, it would look something like this. So the unit in the middle, I'll just 3-star it and I'll power up it so it has like a little bit of a border. Our middle unit will have the maximum keepers value if you surround that unit by other units. Basically with keepers, it's a stacking shield based on adjacent allies. So here, this center unit will gain the maximum keepers value. So basically for every unit that's adjacent, let's read keepers, you get 230 health shield. If we're talking about gold keepers, it's absolutely broken. So this unit basically will gain 200 HP for all of these units. This unit basically gains like 1000 HP plus for like the first couple seconds of the fight. It's massive, it's insane, and it's crazy, and it's one of the best augments in the game. Now, do you position like this always? No, because usually this is going to be a unit that's your tank, and if you position like this, the unit is going to be like out of the game for a really long period of time. By the time they get to the front line, you're going to lose your keeper's value, right? It's going to take them like 10 seconds just to get to the front line through this mess of a fucking gong show you made. So how do you actually position for keepers? Usually just go zigzag. You don't care about the extra keepers value for the front 2 units. Instead, you position all the units that you really care about, and you give them 4 keepers value, right? 230, 230, 230, 230. All of these frontline units, when you zigzag, is going to get like around 1000 or more of health shielding. And these units that are a little bit less important, you can put in the back line, and then they'll walk up. And it's not that big of a deal if they lose as much of the keepers value from just like taking damage in the first place. So whenever you're positioning on keepers, just remember zigzag, right? And then put your main carries surrounded by the most units. There's so many times I see people take keepers and they don't optimize it, and they just play like keepers with a front line. It accounts for all adjacent units. So if you have a main tank or a main damage dealer, specifically like melee carries, it's really good with, because it gives them a lot of survivability. So here I did like a fake duelist board. This is where it matters the most. Make sure that you get your keepers on your main units, and then the rest of the units, who cares? They can have a little bit inferior shielding and walk up a little bit later. Finally, we have positioning to lose a round. So there's a couple ways you can try and lose rounds on purpose. If you want to see me do some of this, you can also look at this game, on my VOD channel, because I did a Crystal Gambit at the start of the game. So, but basically when you're doing positioning to lose, there's many different ways you can lose positioning. Obviously, if you put frontline units in the front line and your backline units, you swap the sides. These units aren't made to absorb damage, so they will die very easily. Something else you can do, if you look specifically on this side, not this side, you know, it is what it is, right? You have like some units here. But however, if you put your unit in this corner, this is called trapping. You can actually trap a unit in this corner. So this is a melee unit, right? This is a frontline unit. Vi, she has a 1 hex range. But this is a ranged unit, and this is a ranged unit. So what ends up happening is, if you position like this, you basically remove one of your units from the game for an extended period of time. So now the enemy will just walk up, these units will do damage, these units will die, and then the Vi will come in at the end, which then is too late because the Vi doesn't have any damage because all your damage dealers died. This is really important when you're trying to sack, especially if you're playing something like Crystal Gambit, because if you're playing against another person's board, even if they're really weak, this is a way to position such that you're like in a spot. Now obviously the enemy carry, let's say you're like 2 Crystal Gambit players and they're going up against each other, it becomes like a mind game thing because they can do the same thing, and then it's just a 50-50, right? Obviously, like you know, But a lot of the times, like, you know, it depends, right? If you want to counter this, then you put your enemy carries here, or you try and crack their positioning like this, right? And then like this unit will have to walk up, and then it releases the Vi. So there are ways around it, but obviously if you're positioning to lose, you want to make sure that you sack your carries as much as possible if you really have to. And then there's also the idea of trapping, because that can matter a lot. And then obviously you could space out your units a little bit, right? Give your Vi like maximum time to walk up if you can't trap your units effectively. Or you could just, like, you know, try and like distract the enemy carry or distract your own units to make them like walk up or spend time walking around. But the trapping was the main thing I wanted to show here. But anyways, that's what we wanted to show today. That is the positioning guide. So I went through a lot of details. I went through a lot of stuff. Just make sure, like, you know, if I had to give you like a Spark Notes takeaway, obviously, you know, the main thing is like, you know, positioning guide, stronger, frontline, same side, weaker, frontline, opposite, default, opposite, corner for carry. Right, those are like the little Spark Notes, and then everything else is very situational, as we talked about here. Hopefully that was helpful. I know it's gonna be a little bit boring. I'll try and put timestamps because it's like an hour-long video, but hopefully it was fun and enjoyable. Have a great day, and see ya. Bye bye.